Okay, good morning. Welcome to today's UK webinar on heat networks. Why do they matter and why won't they go away? Intriguing title and a topic that actually is particularly important to BTR operators and developers. My name is Dave Butler. I'm CEO of the UKA. Joined today by Emily Lister from Insight Energy, who's going to give us a short presentation on the topic of heat networks, and then be joined by a couple of colleagues for questions and answers. So just to remind you, the session is being recorded. It will be available on our website in about 24 hours time. We do have a Q&A option on the bottom. Do use that to ask questions of the panelists. We'll probably be picking those up as we go along, although I'm sure Emily will cover a lot of the questions while we're on it. There is also the chat function if you want to chat to us, chat to me, chat to Emily, chat to our panelists. Okay, without any more ado, I'll just hand you over to Emily, who's Head of Business Development for Insight Energy, one of the UK's members and very good supporter. So Emily, over to you.
Thank you. Hi everyone. I've just realised that the date on the slide says the 18th of June, so apologies for that. You're not going crazy. It is the 15th, so yeah, you haven't lost 3 days. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for joining us today, where we'll be discussing the topic of heat networks in build-to-rent developments. So why they're there and how they can be effectively managed. So for anyone who isn't clear on what a heat network is, broadly it's defined as any heating or cooling system that delivers energy through a series of insulated pipes to multiple end users from a single source, like a centralised boiler room. So heat networks can also be described as district or communal networks, depending on the number of buildings that they supply. So district heating is more commonly seen where an energy supply company supplies a small area of a town or city with one network, and buildings have to connect to that system. Whereas communal heating is associated with a single building fed by a centralised source of heating and or cooling. So there might be a few terms there that you may or may not be familiar with, just to try and cover everyone. My slide doesn't seem to be moving. There we go. Okay, so just a quick agenda. We'll start with a quick overview of who Insight Energy are, why we're here, what our background is, before moving on to setting the scene in terms of the UK's heat network landscape. During May, we carried out some focus groups with developers and operators within the industry. So we'll share some key themes that we've gleaned through that feedback. So we really appreciate your time for anyone that took part in that, if you're here today. And thank you for all of that great insight that has helped us to shape this and kind of the themes moving forward. We'll then run through some considerations when choosing the best product and services for your residents before exploring potential solutions for developers, operators and customers when it comes to metering and billing on heat networks. So we might not capture everything today, so if you do have any specific questions, please do let us know. As Dave mentioned, we'll then move on to a Q&A where I'll be joined by Douglas Norton from SAV Systems and Anthony Coates-Smith from Insight Energy, and we can review some specific questions and go through anything that you want more detail on. So, who are we? We're a heat network service provider specialising in metering and billing solutions. So as well as providing great customer experiences and network maintenance, we've got over 10 years of experience in developing and delivering solutions for a range of clients, both in the public and private sector, which increasingly includes the build-to-rent world. The main services that we provide are market-leading metering and billing solutions. We serve over 25,000 homes across 250 UK schemes. We offer a range of pay-as-you-go solutions as well as credit billing and aim to work with our clients to develop the best strategy for each development. So you may be familiar with some other metering and billing providers in the industry, and the solutions might be there might be some synergies in the solutions that you have on your development. We do also provide lifecycle support from on-site supply and commissioning through to debt management and performance reviews, as well as maintenance services for heat and cooling assets. Okay, so a bit more about heat networks for those that may or may not be familiar with them. I wouldn't be too surprised if you're not. They do only provide currently around 2% of the UK's building heat demand. This is, however, expected to grow significantly, with estimates that around 18% of the UK heat will need to come from heat networks by 2050 if we're to meet our carbon targets. Increasingly, local governments are advocating, and in many cases mandating, that developers connect their new build properties to a low carbon heat network. So to meet the anticipated growth from 2% to 18%, and in view of national and local government policy, it's evident that heat networks won't go away and in fact will become more common, along with other technologies that you may be getting more familiar with, such as heat pumps. There are recurring issues that crop up with heat networks, which may be familiar to some of you here today. They mainly surround a lack of regulation and resultant inconsistencies, starting with design and specification, right through to ongoing customer service delivery. Lower levels of understanding, both for operators and residents, can cause confusion and frustration, as there are some niches that aren't quite aligned to the familiar regulated world of gas and electric. However, heat is one of the biggest focuses for our journey to zero carbon, and even though it might not be the only heat solution, heat networks are definitely here to stay due to their lower carbon credentials and flexibility. Following a review by the CMA on behalf of the government in 2018, regulation is coming. But in the meantime, there are a few key policies that frame the industry, notably the metering and billing regs, as well as heat trust guidelines, which focus on consumer protection. If you'd like more information or more detail on any of the policies, then please do let us know. But it might switch a few of you off if we go through that this morning. Okay, so while we look at networks here at Insight, we did think we knew build to rent, but we do accept that you don't know what you don't know. So we hired external independent research experts to carry out a number of focus groups with build to rent developers and operators to gauge understanding, frustrations and experiences within the industry when it comes to all things heat networks. Some of the feedback was aligned with our expectations, but there were some key themes that were quite eye-opening to us as service providers. And the word cloud here demonstrates some of the key themes that came out of these sessions. Customer experience naturally is a prominent focus, but as well, there are a few other really strong themes that came through, such as longer term vision and alignment with brand, services, systems, and making things simple for both customer and client, with inherent flexibility throughout to make sure that all the needs of all stakeholders are met. So hopefully some of those words are familiar to you. So building on that, talking about a bit more detail about the different elements of heat networks in particular and what that means. With build to rent growing at the pace it has over recent years, developers, operators and their contractors are coming up against challenges that other sectors have seen before and solved. So as heat networks, they're not new to a lot of cities in the UK. One of the most frequently reported issues, both historically and in emerging build-to-rent developments, is that the solutions specified for metering, billing and managing the heat network post-build haven't taken into account all the factors that operators and ultimately residents would like to see addressed. So with so much choice in the market and equipment and service providers during construction, it's really difficult to know what's right. And there isn't a truly right answer. There are loads of different solutions that can be adapted to work for you. But not all solutions that contractors or developers can buy and install perform in the same way or provide the same level of flexibility and transparency that's expected. So this experience isn't dissimilar to that of private developers, PRS operators, and housing associations who have operated heat networks over the past 10 years or so. And where there are now successes, it's a result of having brought together key stakeholders throughout the life cycle of a heat network in the early stages of writing the specifications that dictate what's built into the development. For example, Having the operations team who will run the site post-build set out what's important to them from the systems that go into the properties and the site as a whole. So there are loads of factors to consider, and we've just picked out a few key ones here, from hardware through to software and then ongoing services. And having clear requirements for each of these elements has been key to the delivery of quality customer services and consistency across portfolios, which make it easier for everyone involved. So I'll just touch on a few aspects here in a bit more detail and some elements to consider. So starting with number one, the equipment and hardware. Are you willing to let your contractors value engineer things like meters and HIUs? Is a big question. And if you are you aware of the impact of those selections and specifications across the life cycle of the development? So the choices that are made in boxes 1 and 2, to split it out crudely, affect the quality of services and options that are available later down the line in boxes 3 and 4. For example, if you look at meters, there are loads of different meters available to contractors, and if they chose one that has Modbus, Zigbee or GSM output, they might not realise that the options that are available to you for metering and billing in box 3 are immediately limited. So specifying wide MBus, for example, as your meter data output method, keeps your options open later down the line, and then ultimately limits that negative impact that your contractors might have unknowingly put on you by specifying something that they think is good for you through value engineering at the beginning, but that ripple effect hasn't been explored. And then when it comes to software, have your suppliers been open and honest about any software as a service fees associated with equipment installed in their development? And another aspect there is how user-friendly is the solution selected, and how will it interact with any existing systems or portals in place, which are increasingly becoming a focus for new developments, having everything in one nice portal that's easy to access. And then when it comes to customer services, there's a huge range of capabilities and service delivery in the market, and it was repeatedly brought out in the market research that customer service to residents is critical, as is transparency, and therefore due diligence on the actual performance of service providers is essential. Not all service providers are equal, and unfortunately there is a greater disparity in quality compared to the regulated gas and electricity market. Routinely in the market research, concerns were raised around debt management and residents not paying for heat. So where that is a concern, the most common method for addressing this issue in the PRS market has been by the installation of a solution that can operate in both credit and pay-as-you-go mode. And now new solutions, such as the Curve pay-as-you-go web app, make this choice easier by providing a more affordable option. So products like this are much more in line with a digitally focused demographic, and negative connotations historically associated with pay-as-you-go or prepayment are disappearing. And finally, when it comes to maintenance, we're increasingly seeing an appetite for smart maintenance. So for those who haven't experienced this, it's the use of data analytics at property level to determine where HIUs need servicing, rather than blanket maintenance of HIUs over a fixed 1 or 2 year period. It reduces customer interruptions, speeds up the resolution of heat-related customer service issues, and reduces the cost of maintenance. However, again, the ability to do that is limited to what is specified and installed back down the line in boxes 1 and 2, which might all but remove the ability to incorporate smart maintenance capabilities into the delivery strategy. So we've just touched on a few elements there. Appreciate it's a non-exhaustive list, and there might be other things that we've not mentioned that you'd like to talk about in more detail. More than happy to. Please do let us know, and we're happy to talk through. So we'll just dig into some of the key themes that came up in the focus groups when we were talking about different stakeholder groups. So for developers in particular, start there. Key themes that cropped up were focus on quality solutions that are designed with the end-to-end life cycle of the development in mind. So some potential solutions. Engaging with experts in the management of heat networks is one way of ensuring that all aspects of the system will be considered, which includes maintenance and replacement, where the costs are ultimately reflected in the prices paid by residents. So this might not always be external experts or consultants. There are many experts within your own companies that have vast experience with heat network operations and customer service operations, and might have insightful views on solutions to use and the methods of management. A lot of people don't realise the responsibilities that come with being a heat supplier, as it is quite a niche market. So engaging with experts early on, ahead of occupation, allows planning and delivery of the highest quality of service. So in our experience from 10 years ago, or over the past 10 years, large private developers whose projects include heat networks and communal networks left delivery of all aspects heat network to the constructions team. But consequently, in many cases, the delivered solutions were not fit for purpose in the eyes of the operators or their managing agents post practical completion, because there are different challenges there. So learning from that, the view was include all stakeholders from within the organisation before construction contracts are let, to make sure that specifications that go into those contracts deliver systems and solutions that enable the operators and managing agents to deliver the high quality services that they expect to be delivering to their residents, which mitigates any financial and PR risks associated. And we do see some new entrants to the build to rent market finding themselves in a similar position to where those clients were 10 years ago. So perhaps taking on board that learning might support in your heat network strategy moving forward. And similar to when we carried out the market research for build to rent, and we kind of accepted that we don't know what we don't know, access to data on heat networks is very much the same. And not having the data on how a heat network is performing leaves you blind to unseen issues which impact service and cost. For example, having check meters at a block level, which might actually be a legal requirement, and having those connected to a data analytics platform such as Camstruct Reedy Pro or similar, provides a view of performance across all aspects of the system and promotes efficiencies, as well as signposting any install and commissioning defects, such as bypasses on the heat networks being left open, which is quite common. So not putting in or value engineering out plant room and check meters might seem beneficial at the time at the construction end, but ensuring these meters are installed and connected to a data analytics system, make sure that the visibility, cost, risk mitigation that you'll benefit in the long run throughout the life cycle of the development is really beneficial. So then moving on to operators. Again, the key themes were quite similar as you might expect, and there's a strong focus on the availability of ongoing support from service providers, both for day-to-day queries as well as specifically in relation to debt management. So there was a view of looking for partners rather than suppliers, with transparency being of increasing importance in order to build trust. So one of the things that we picked up on in the market research is that there's an expectation that if service providers offer meter and billing, there are basic standards that all do and will deliver. But there is a huge amount of disparity between service providers and the level of quality that you and your residents may expect to receive. So it's worth getting sight of key processes such as change of tenancy, as well as accreditations and customer service stats to understand strategy and approach, as the tone of service providers can vary considerably. And building these more qualitative questions into your procurement strategy might be useful to make sure that there's that brand alignment and synergy with your own customer service strategies. And then additionally, when thinking about procurement and specification setting, it's the perfect time to make sure that flexibility is embedded within the system. So one key element to consider is the ability to switch between pay-as-you-go and credit modes, which provides options for yourselves as operators as well as individual residents in how they manage their energy supply. So again, there's a huge range of products on the market with different price tags and different capabilities, but spending that time to make sure you specify the solution that best meets your long-term requirements and your objectives protects you and your residents from service and cost risks in the future. And finally, on that point, replacement expenditure, or REPEX, as you might know it as, is becoming more into focus on heat networks. And that should factor into your pay-as-you-go solutions, as well as other equipment and hardware being installed in the developments, as ultimately that cost will be reflected in the price of heat. And then thirdly, the third kind of theme of category was residents. So when considering the wants and needs of residents, there was a clear requirement for a hassle-free customer experience. Specifically, again, flexibility played through, as well as providing an element of choice for residents in how they manage their energy, as well as providing access to easy access support and simple and clear processes to follow wherever touch points are necessary. So, as it is a requirement for residents to be billed on actual usage, heat can't be bundled in rent. So to mitigate against any perceived inconvenience, finding a service provider with multi-channel communication methods, whether that be web chat, phone, email, there's loads of different service providers out there with varying proven track records in customer services. So it's worth doing a bit of research and finding one that's aligned with your own brand and your own communication style and what your residents expect from their development. So it minimises the number of interactions residents need to have with providers, and where touch points are needed, those defined processes and easy to use tools and widgets make sure that efficient resolution is achieved. None of us want to interact with our service providers, so the quicker and the process, the better. However, one thing that residents do want to engage with is their usage, and that's becoming more prominent in the industry as customers become more savvy with budgeting and more digitally connected. So again, there are multiple solutions in the market which provide real-time data to residents that have shown to reduce consumption by up to 20% and educate residents with their behaviours. So we have access to data on residents using our Curve web app, and we've been able to see a surprising level of engagement with usage graphs and tables. So we expected to see that payment pages were the most viewed, but in fact 47% of all page views for connected residents has been them viewing their consumption. So not giving residents the access to their data would have likely resulted in contact with their service provider, which A, they might not have really wanted to do, and B, the data might not be readily available, which potentially creates a negative customer experience as well as unnecessary interaction and can ultimately damage the reputation and trust. Okay, I'm sure you're getting tired of my voice, so I'm nearly there, I promise. In summary, heat networks are here to stay, and there are many considerations to take on board when thinking about the best strategy for you and your portfolio and ultimately your residents. So whilst heat networks might be new or might not be new to you, they're not new in the industry, and there are benefits of lessons learned within the private development world for you to take on board today. So speaking to experts in the industry and within your own teams is a great place to start to gather feedback on what works well and what to avoid, and then feeding this into a consistent, defined specification, and then feeding through into a clear procurement strategy means you don't have to keep reinventing the wheel, and you can maintain control over the strategy of the direction and easily integrate any changes that you want to make. And then once you've done that and you've chosen your providers and your hardware and everything else, the rest should be easy. Clearly defined processes then from your service providers would ensure a smooth transition through to live services, and any further engagement will be delivered to the quality and services and the service standards that you expect, in alignment with your own branding and communication standards. So both for residents and yourselves. And I think another key takeaway, heat network services aren't an off-the-shelf product. There's not kind of product A, product B. They are flexible and they can be adapted to what you need. So if you can shape the strategy that you want to see, that will be available, and there will be flexibility. There will be a flexible strategy there for you. Okay, finally, some key critical takeaways that hopefully sound familiar from this morning's session. Focus on all elements of the customer journey and all steps and all stakeholders. I think that's the next one. Yeah. And then make sure that the specification works for you and everyone else involved. So if construction-led value engineering is proposed, make sure that all of those stakeholders that are engaged sign off on that and understand the impact throughout the journey. And then finally, just touching on that, then make sure that the cost, quality and flexibility work for you and your residents over the long term for your development and in line with the strategy that you want to set. Okay, so if you do have any questions on anything that we've touched on today, please do get in touch and let us know. Or if you want to go into more detail or anything, we're here to talk. But I'm sure you've heard more than enough from me. So we'll move on to our Q&A session now, where I'm joined by Anthony and Douglas. So I'm not sure, I've not been looking at the chat and the Q&A as we've been going through, so I'm not sure what's come through. But if you do have any questions, if you pop them in to the chat, to the Q&A function, and we can answer any of your questions.
Perhaps before we get to questions in the Q&A, can I ask a few questions? Well, I thought it was a genuinely fascinating presentation, and for the viewers and your benefit, look, that's exactly the sort of stuff we want to see in the UK best practice guide, an approach to do it, addressing an issue that's topical, and an approach that looks at it from a holistic perspective. So thank you for that, and we'll be coming back and asking you for it. There are a couple of things that came through to me on there. One was, you talked a lot about risk. You talked a lot about customer experience, which are key things from my perspective. You didn't talk a huge amount about sustainability and the impact that has on heat networks, or the ways in which that can vary. Anthony and Doug, I don't know whether, Emily, whether it's a topic that you can perhaps give us a few thoughts on. What is best practice in that sense?
Doug, do you want to go first, or I'm happy to take it if you want?
But I think I can do an answer, and then maybe you can build on it. I think if I get your question correct, it's more understanding the sustainable aspect of heat networks. Why are we doing it? And that's really, it's the ability to be able to use any type of heat source as your provider for your heat and sort of heat and hot water within the dwelling. In traditional buildings, where we always think about gas boilers and sort of high temperatures, you're stuck. You're stuck with a gas boiler. You could maybe go to sort of a sort of hydrogen gas boiler, etc. But you're really stuck with what you've got. The really good thing about heat networks is that when you've got centralized heat production, you can start putting in different technologies. These could be heat pumps. It could be then starting to think about waste heat. So a lot of heat networks around the world, they start introducing things like waste heat from data centers nearby, etc. That waste heat can then be put into your heat network, and it's extremely green and very good for the environment. Off the back of that, the whole network is then designed to be able to accept all these different energy sources, and that's really the reason why heat networks are pushed and promoted. It's not just so you can put a gas boiler down in a plant room, it's so you can then start integrating with everything around you and start making sure that actually this is a low carbon future and we can do good things with our buildings.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, just to give people a bit of context around the journey, Emily pointed out in an early slide, we're looking at getting from 2% of building demand coming from communal heat, covering 2% of heat demand currently, to 18% by 2050. So it's a journey that we're on. And while you might see predominantly gas boilers on heat networks in centralized plant room feeding the heat networks, that's clearly not a carbon net zero solution, but it is a greener solution. So it's a journey that steps us up from individual gas boilers to centralized plant, more carbon efficient, and then moving on from that, I think we'll see further technology, as Doug says, being integrated to phase out gas boiler led solutions into other electrified solutions, such as heat pumps, where the primary input food is electricity, and then the UK electricity grid will decarbonise fully by 2050 as a target. So sustainability is at the core of Heat Networks. Having the infrastructure in place, having the customer service element and customer adoption of this strategy is key. And for a lot of customers, what they don't realise is the green journey is not necessarily a cheaper journey. It's the right thing to do for the planet long term, but there are costs along the way that ultimately will be borne by developers or their consumers. So I think education on that journey is always going to be key to keep engagement.
Yeah, I think perfect. And one more point, just as sort of building on Ant's there, is as you've got a centralized sort of plant room, you can start adding multiple technologies. So it's not all about sort of pinning your hopes on one technology and saying heat pumps are, this is what we need to do. Because what can happen with heat pumps is that you're running on electricity gets more and more expensive. What do you do? So in a centralized plant room scenario, you can have heat pumps as well as a CHP, as well as sort of waste heat, as well as maybe a different type of electric boiler, etc. So it really then works all nicely in that sort of fluctuating market where actually maybe electricity starts getting very expensive. You can then fall back on a different type of technology and sort of fluctuate. And that's sort of where the heat network industry is moving towards, and saying we can make sure we've got the right equipment running at the right time.
No, that's interesting, and actually that is right. That it is about seat source as much as the delivery method. Emily, sorry, you highlighted a couple of times the need to get people engaged all through the cycle, for the operator to be involved at the specification stage. What if they're not? And what if you're an operator, you come across, you deliver with a piece of kit that's got the wrong infrastructure? What do you do about it? What can you do about it? If there's metering at the wrong place, all that sort of thing. Anton, Doug, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to pick that up. I mean, that's pretty common, right? So I would expect there are people here today who have sites in their portfolio that they've got to work with what they've got. They don't have an unlimited budget to go and fix things that somebody else chose for them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. And it's a difficult question because there are no necessarily free silver bullets that will fix the problem. But you can tackle it piecemeal to improve the situation. So working with what you've got, if it's, I think the first thing is to understand what you've got, to really get into the technology that you have been given and determine if it can be made better, if it can be operated better, if it can be tweaked by the people who originally supplied and installed it to give me what I want. So I think engaging back with the supply chain, if they're still available or around, or looking, as Emily said, for a service provider who has experience in adopting or fixing failing systems. Mm-hmm. It won't get you to the panacea of optimum performance, but it will improve your system. Long term, though, I suppose it's about building into your maintenance and asset replacement schedules, that there has to be some long-term goal that's going to require a CapEx solution to replace failing kit. Any asset replacement strategy should be in place anyway over maybe a 10-year life cycle for kit. Do something piecemeal to get you to that point, and then have the budget in place to make a wholesale change later when you can afford it.
So what life expectancy should you budget for if you're an operator or an asset manager, I guess?
Good question. The answer to that comes again back to what equipment has been specified during construction, because normally the manufacturers will give you an expected lifetime, and if you maintain it properly and well and take care of the kit, it should last that long. So I mean, it's a fairly common number, but 10 years is usually given around, and any accountants that support service charge budgets will typically give you a 10-year straight line depreciation. So that's sort of the number we see. But again, there are products on the market now that number 10 is going up closer to 20. Mm-hmm. So when Emily talked about considering RepEx, if you look for a product that actually is A, lower cost in the first instance, and B, has a life expectancy of maybe 10, 15, 20 years, the actual cost on your residents that you're putting through the service charge or heat, if that's how you cover it, reduces. And again, that promotes acceptance of Heat Networks not being a bad thing. But the question you should ask during specification is, what is the lifespan of this equipment? The longer the better.
And do we have enough experience yet to know whether the specifications actually are true? I mean, Emily, you talked about market being 10 years old, but if a standard spec is 10 years, then we should be starting to see a lot of kit being replaced or failing now. Is that the case, or is it typically outlasting the specification?
I think there's definitely a wide range of answers for this. I think there's the first thing is the performance gap there is at the moment, and that's been highlighted in a fair few studies. You've got the Competition Market Authority that did a study and understanding that there's, as well as good as the specification is, as good as the designer is, when it's actually installed and set up and commissioned, it's not performing as per the design. So that's the initial thing that is seen across the board in heat networks, and something that everyone's trying to make sure is alleviated. There is a lot of work being done in the industry, with code of practice being sort of updated, and various bits of sort of commissioning and sort of other bits, which make sure that performance gap. So hopefully it is to specification initially, is minimized. Secondly, yes, there are sites now where they're going through that change and replacement. Some of them due to equipment, due to the maintenance, the care of the system, have to be replaced much sooner than 10 years. We've seen some very quick turnaround on equipment, but also there are some case stories out there with certain manufacturers where they can prove that they've got sites that have been active for 7-10 years already, and they're still running fine. So there are, if you do look out for them, there are case studies out there to show, yeah, these schemes are still running with the same technology that's available today.
And I think also it's worth picking up, again, in Emily's presentation, she talked about value engineering by construction teams. So, what's the goal of value engineering through construction? Is it to reduce the outlay for the contractors involved? Are they on a fixed price? Who gets a benefit of that value engineering if in 5 years' time you're having to replace a cheaper kit that they bought? And I know that there will be good value equipment out there. You can't just say because it's cheap, it's rubbish. But, there are some truisms in, buy it cheap, buy it twice, and other things that we'll all have heard. And I think you do take a risk when you let somebody else value engineer your specification without understanding the long-term consequence.
I think that's right. I mean, the value engineering is great, but it's allied to transferring risk. It's passing on the cost risk from the contractor to you long term, or to the eventual buyer, and that's one of the key differences in build to rent, that hopefully it's the same capital stack all the way through that's assuming that risk, as opposed to a developer saying, build it as cheap as I can, sell it off to somebody else who has that risk, not me. You've mentioned about data, Emily, being really important as well, and highlighted data available from the network itself. But is there industry data available about what's good and what's bad, and what you should be looking for? Doug, you mentioned the CMA report.
Yeah, it's depending on sort of the data you're after. There's definitely some out there. A lot of sort of site performance generally, I find in the UK, is sort of everyone holds it close to their chest.
Yeah.
I find whether people are embarrassed or whether they want to keep it as their sole sort of use, I don't know. There is some performance data out there. You've got some more code of practice, like the CP1 2020 has a lot more sort of actual, like, backed up, saying, right, this is what you should design for lower temperatures. This is what you need to aim for. This is where you need to go for your DHW temperature, etc. And that's backed up by data. In regards to sort of your own data, and sort of making assumptions from that, the key is being able to have access to it. Yeah. Not every metering system is created equal. That comes down to, one, having access to that data, but two, also what data you receive. And I would go to sort of more lengths and to understand that and actually see what you're getting, to make sure that actually you are empowered to use your data. So I think Emily did mention it in the presentation, but open protocol is a big discussion, and it's one of the big buzzwords in the industry at the moment. And there's sort of murky waters, I'll say, in the industry for all these different technologies, but I'll say they're open data or open protocol, or say that yes, we can do it. But I think the key thing for me is make sure that you know how you get access to your data. And then for me, is what if? What if I fall out with the service provider? What if I don't like the technology and I need to change? What if I can't give that data to my energy analyst, or I can't give that data to my supplier who wants to do maintenance? So I think it's trying to create that complete solution and say, okay, for the full life cycle of my product, my scheme, I want to have access to my data to give maintenance. I want to have access to my data to do site sort of efficiency reports. I want to have access to my data for metering and billing. Does the solution I have provide me that? If it doesn't, how can I do that? And sort of goes back to open protocol.
Yeah.
Wired MBus, I would like to just do a plug for it. Wired MBus is the only true open protocol network out there. You can sort of use any energy meter, you can use any data logger, you can use pretty much any software, and it's not sort of locked down to single people. So that's why it's pushed in the UK, and that's why you see so much of it.
I think, Doug, to add to that, I mean, for me, not being an engineer, you know, when we think about access to data, if you ever see raw MBus data, it's like watching the opening credits to The Matrix. It's just streams of stuff that you can't figure out. But what you know, as a layman, what I need and what operators need or metering and billing companies need is we need a data visualization software that presents it in layman's terms with traffic lights to say where you've got a problem that you can, you know, contact your maintenance team. So, and there are really good products out there, and I won't name check all of them, but you know, Guru's Pinpoint and Camstruct 3D Pro are both really good examples of data visualization that a non-engineer can understand. So that's on the engineering side of how do you get data out of a network, but don't forget the customer experience. Emily was talking about vetting your supply chain to make sure customer experience is there. And I think, yeah, there's probably lots of, well, there's a few customer experience go-tos, but I think a lot of people now, if they've got something they want to either shout about, good or bad, Trustpilot seems to be the place of choice. So, you know, a lot of metering and billing companies in heat networks are on Trustpilot, and that's a good place to start because you can read what real customers say in the real world. So it's not just about the data on site, it's about the data from customer experience too.
Okay. I've got stacks of questions. I'm conscious the audience probably haven't. So if I could just finish with two more questions. One is the big no-no about heat networks that was always told to me in my youth 10 years ago was that it was great when they were working fine, but when they broke down, everybody's power went off. And if you're an operator, or everybody's heat went, if you're an operator, my God, hell broke loose. Is that actually true? Is there a myth? Is it right that there are reliability issues? Or
so I think, I mean, from a service provider's point of view, we're looking after 250 heat networks, and I can say that it's not an entire, you know, it's not without a grain of truth, but it's certainly not to the extent that people concern themselves with it. So one of the reasons sometimes we see inefficient heat networks in operation is because developers and consultants have overcompensated for that risk by oversizing and putting in extra capacity and redundant kit to back up a heat network in the event that it fails. And all you're doing is adding more assets in there that don't get used but need to be maintained. So you're adding cost in for that guarantee. And what we see in reality is actually a well-maintained heat network that's been commissioned correctly. Actually, no, you don't see failures. They do happen, but the same as an individual gas boiler fail, you know, only one person's affected. And when they do happen, it's about how is your service provider provisioned the response? Do they have good audited suppliers of temporary plant? Has the building been designed such that temporary plant can easily be connected into the heat network should it be required? So I think mitigating that sort of risk has become norm in construction, but operators should be asking you know, their procurement guys those questions at spec to make sure that that is considered. But on the whole, I would say no. It's not true to say that, you know, heat networks let en masse people down. The ones that go wrong hit the news, and we saw a few this year, and that's a shame. I think the people operating them probably could have done a better job than they did in terms of response.
But yeah, and I think that's true generally about build-to-rent operators. If you're a good operator, you're managing the customer experience. You know things go wrong. You've taken account of it beforehand, and you respond effectively. Okay, I'm conscious of time. I'm conscious of asking lots of questions. Perhaps I can hand back to you, Emily and Anthony and Doug, for closing remarks, and then I'll say thank you, and we'll end. Unless, of course, there's other questions you want to ask or anything our audience wants to ask. So they've been very quiet.
Yeah, it has been a quiet one from the audience. I don't know if we've just bamboozled everyone or answered all the questions. Go with the latter. If anyone does have any questions and wants to send them through directly, then please do. There don't seem to be any more that have come through the Q&A function.
There is one, Emily. So you've mentioned pay-as-you-go as an effective debt management tool, but how would you deal with debt on a site that does not have pay-as-you-go installed and residents are on credit billing?
Perfect. Well, that sounds like, what, do you want to take that one, or do you want,
Yeah, I'm happy to if you want. So yeah, what we've seen over the past 8 years is that there's been a mass exodus to pay-as-you-go, regardless of tenure type in construction. So high-end, very, very high-end developments in London will still have pay-as-you-go systems installed because the current versions are just not what you might expect. They're very customer savvy. But if you don't have that, and therefore you can't afford to put it in retrospectively, credit billing is the option you have to work with, right? So for us as a metering billing service provider, the first ingredient to providing good credit billing and reducing debt is actually get your billing right. So whatever data network you've got in place, make sure it's as good as it can be in terms of fixing out meters that have got faults. That should just be a straightforward plumbing, job to go and swap out a meter, get the data out of the units. And if your data network is failing, go old school, ask residents to submit reads so that you're actually billing on actuals, because people will much more readily accept a bill if it's a number they've seen on their meter than just what you plucked out of the air or estimated. So that's the first thing, get the billing as accurate as possible so that resident acceptance of the bill is higher. And then there are other simple things. Once you've got the billing right, it's making sure you've got clear customer comms. So a change of tenancy process, where that falls down and you forget to tell the metering billing operator of a change of tenancy, that's where bills go wrong. The wrong person's getting the bill in the wrong date range, and then debts accrue with the outgoing tenant and the incoming tenant. So having good change of tenancy processes and operators or their managing agents engaging on a regular basis with the billing provider to support them. Billing providers can't do everything on their own. They need data in from sites, from operators, to keep it accurate. If you keep it accurate, debt will reduce. The second you've got inaccuracies, trust goes out the window, debt grows. It really is as simple as that. You can't eradicate all debt on a credit bill site. Whatever you think, people will withhold paying a bill because of something else, nothing to do with heat, particularly in a rented environment. If they're not happy with a state of decoration that should have been repaired, their vote of objection is, I just won't pay any bills that are going to the landlord. So those are the key tips around credit billing. You can't eradicate it all, but by good processes and accurate data, you can improve it.
Brilliant. Thank you for answering that one. No others have come through, so thank you both for your panelist contributions. And thank you, Dave, for your questions. So I'll hand back over to you, Dave, to close. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Emily, and thank you, Anthony, and thank you, Douglas. Genuinely, that was a really helpful, insightful presentation, and I certainly learned a lot. And whilst I don't normally check out recordings of webinars, I think when I come to look at thinking about heat networks and thinking about a best practice guide, I might well go back and refer to this one, because I think we've genuinely learned a lot there.